My son told me, "Mum, you'll watch the kids at the wedding. It'll be fun." Fun? Babysitting 10 children while 200 adults drink champagne? I'd already paid for half the decorations, baked 3 cakes, and now they wanted me to chase screaming toddlers in heels. So instead of baking cookies, I packed sunscreen. Instead of a hair appointment, I booked a flight. When the wedding started, their nanny was boarding a plane. And I heard later the reception turned into a daycare disaster. Before I tell you how that chaos unfolded and what I found out when I came back, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story. Because sometimes walking away isn't selfish, it's survival. My name is Margaret Hayes, I'm 68 years old, and I used to believe there was no such thing as too much love when it came to family. If my son needed me, I was there, no questions asked. When his father died 15 years ago, I carried both our weights. I worked double shifts at the preschool, cooked his favourite meals every Sunday, and told myself one day he'll realise how much I gave up for him. Well, that one day came, but not the way I expected. It was a warm Tuesday evening in early May. My little Florida house smelled of cinnamon and lemon polish, and I was icing cupcakes for Ethan's wedding shower. He and his fiancée, Samantha, were visiting to finalise the last details before the big day. I'd spent the whole week making decorations, ribbon flowers, even matching table cards. Ethan came into the kitchen, tie loosened, holding a notepad. "Mom, the caterer confirmed, right?" I smiled. "Of course. They'll deliver everything by 10. Samantha followed behind him, in her perfect cream dress, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when she said, "Oh, by the way, we'll need you to help with the kids at the wedding." "The kids?" I asked, still stirring frosting. "Yeah," Ethan said casually. "There'll be around 10 of them, maybe 12. You're so good with children, Mom. We thought you'd love to keep them entertained during the reception." I froze. The spoon slipped from my hand, leaving a white streak across the counter. I blinked at him. "Wait, during the reception?" Samantha finally looked up, smiling like she was offering me a favour. "Yes, we'll set up a small play area near the back of the hall. The parents will drop their kids off with you so they can relax and enjoy the party. Isn't that wonderful?" I thought she was joking. I even laughed softly. "You're kidding, right?" But Ethan didn't laugh. "Come on, Mom. You've always been great with kids. This will be easy for you." My smile died somewhere between his sentence and my heartbeat. I looked at my son, my only son, and saw no irony in his eyes. Just assumption. Pure, thoughtless assumption. "You're serious," I whispered. "Of course," Samantha said brightly. "It'll save us from hiring a sitter, and you'll have fun. We'll make sure there's a comfy chair for you and plenty of juice boxes for the kids." Juice boxes. They were talking to me like I was part of the catering staff. I wiped my hands on a towel, trying to hide the tremor in my fingers. "So, I'm not a guest at the wedding then?" Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" "Of course you're invited." "Invited to do what exactly?" I asked quietly. "Watch children or watch my son get married?" The silence that followed was the longest I'd ever heard in my own kitchen. Samantha shifted uncomfortably. Ethan rubbed his neck. Finally, he said, "Mom, please don't make this dramatic. It's just a favour." Just a favour. I'd spent 3 months sewing table runners, another month tasting cake samples, and nearly emptied my savings account helping him pay the florist. And now I was the favour. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, just a thin, cold sound, like glass under pressure. I forced a smile, the kind that hurts your cheeks. "Sure, darling, whatever you need." Ethan exhaled in relief. "Thanks, Mom, you're the best." Samantha added, "You're a lifesaver." They didn't notice how my voice didn't answer back. They didn't notice how my hands stayed still on the countertop, the frosting melting under my touch. After they left, the house felt enormous and empty. I stood in the kitchen staring at the cupcakes, their pastel icing perfectly smooth, like the way I'd trained myself to stay calm even when my heart was breaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan at 5 years old, holding my hand on his first day of school. He had looked up at me and said, "You're my hero, Mum." And now, 40 years later, that same boy had turned me into his babysitter. Around midnight, I walked to the mirror in the hallway. The woman staring back had lines under her eyes and flour on her cheek, but there was something else, a flicker of realization. For the first time in my life, I saw how invisible I had become. They didn't mean to humiliate me, not exactly, but they didn't see me anymore, not as a mother, not as a guest, not even as a person who could say no. I whispered to the empty house, "I'm not the nanny, I'm the mother of the groom." The words echoed softly through the dark kitchen, and somewhere deep inside, I knew something had just changed. The next morning, the smell of yesterday's cupcakes still lingered in my kitchen, but instead of sweetness, it carried a bitter aftertaste, like something gone stale overnight. I poured myself a cup of coffee, but it went cold before I even took a sip. All I could think about were Ethan's words. "You'll love it, Mom. It'll be fun." Fun? I had been many things in my life, a wife, a teacher, a widow, a mother, but never a fool. And yet, in that moment, I felt like one. When did my son stop seeing me as his mother and start seeing me as a convenient option? When did my love become part of the wedding budget? The truth settled in like humidity in the Florida air, heavy, sticky, impossible to ignore. I tried to distract myself, cleaning the same counter I'd already wiped twice, rearranging napkins, folding dish towels. But every small sound, the creak of the floor, the ticking of the clock, whispered the same word, used. It wasn't just about babysitting, it was what it meant. I had raised Ethan alone after his father Thomas passed away. For years, every decision I made, from skipping vacations to working late, was to make sure Ethan had everything he needed. When he got his first job, I cried. When he got engaged, I cried again. But out of pride, I thought I'd finally done it, raised a good man, a grateful man. But gratitude doesn't last long when comfort takes its place. I walked through the house and saw little reminders of all the times I'd said yes. The framed photo from his college graduation, I'd sold my wedding ring to help pay his tuition. The blender on the counter, a gift from me for his first apartment. Even the sofa he sat on last night was one I'd given him when he moved back after his first divorce. And now, his second wedding was turning into my unpaid shift. I opened my planner, an old habit from my teaching days, and there it was, wedding weekend, May 21st. I had written it months ago, surrounded by doodles of hearts and notes like, "Don't cry too much." Now looking at that page felt like staring at someone else's handwriting, a woman who still believed she'd be honoured, not assigned chores. That night, Samantha called me. Her voice was sugary, the kind that sticks to your ears. "Hi, Mrs. Hayes. Just wanted to check if you could also bring some of your famous lemon bars to the reception. The guests love them." I hesitated. "You mean bake them for everyone?" "Yes, please. Oh, and don't worry about bringing a gift. Your help is the best gift." My help. That phrase hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't your presence or your love or even your blessing. It was my help. I forced a polite laugh and said I'd think about it. But when I hung up, I sat there staring at the phone, my hand trembling slightly. It wasn't just Samantha, it was Ethan too. He had listened to her plan and said nothing. No defense, no question, no "Mom, are you okay with that?" Just silence. And silence can hurt louder than words. Later that evening, I found myself digging through old boxes in the guest room, the kind of boxes you open when you're looking for pieces of yourself. Inside were cards Ethan had made as a child. "Happy Mother's Day to the best mum ever." "I love you, Mum. You're my hero." I traced the faded crayon letters with my thumb. Somewhere between those cards and that conversation at the kitchen table, I had gone from hero to hired help. I sat on the floor for a long time, surrounded by memories. And for the first time in years, I felt old, not in body, but in spirit. Not tired from age, but from giving too much. It's strange how motherhood works. You give and give, thinking love is measured by sacrifice. And then one day you realize the more you give without boundaries, the less they see the cost. I went to bed early that night, but sleep refused to come. Instead, my mind replayed every moment. Samantha's chirpy tone, Ethan's casual shrug, my own forced smile. At one point, I whispered into the dark, "Did I raise a man who forgot what respect looks like?" There was no answer, only the sound of the ceiling fan turning above me. Around midnight, thunder rolled outside. Rain started tapping against the windows, slow, steady, like the rhythm of my thoughts. I stood by the window and watched the storm. Somewhere in that restless sound, I saw myself reflected, a woman who had spent decades weathering other people's expectations. And for the first time, I wondered what it would feel like to walk out of the storm instead of waiting for it to pass. That thought scared me and thrilled me. I crawled back into bed, staring at the ceiling until morning light filtered through the curtains. Something inside me was shifting, quietly, like the ocean tide pulling away from the shore. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew this. The next time someone decided my worth for me, I wouldn't smile and nod. The next time, I would choose me. By the third morning, something inside me had gone completely still. Not broken, just quiet, like the sea right before a storm. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Ethan had told me about watching 10 kids. The sunlight fell on the frosting stains that still lingered there, and for the first time, I didn't reach for a rag to clean them. I let them stay, proof that I had spent too many years scrubbing away messes that weren't mine. I opened my laptop. Not to check the wedding schedule or the guest list, but to search something I hadn't typed in decades: flights from Miami to Nassau. When the search results appeared, I actually smiled. Rows of blue oceans on the screen, promising silence, salt, and distance. Distance sounded beautiful. The cheapest flight was Saturday morning, the same day Ethan and Samantha would say their vows. My cursor hovered over confirm booking. For a brief second, I hesitated. Then I clicked. The sound of that single click felt like thunder, soft, but world-changing. It wasn't rebellion, it was reclamation. I leaned back in my chair and whispered, "You've been serving love all your life. It's time to serve dignity." That evening, my best friend Helen called. We'd known each other since high school. She was the one who'd stayed wild and free while I became responsible and predictable. "Margie," she said in her smoky laugh, "you sound different. What's going on?" "I'm taking a trip," I said simply. "To where?" "The Bahamas, this weekend." A pause, then laughter. "This weekend? That's your son's wedding." "Yes, that's the point." She went quiet for a second. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Dead serious." I could almost hear her grin through the phone. "Well, honey, I've waited 40 years to hear that tone from you. You want company?" "Pack your swimsuit," I said. When we hung up, I felt lighter than I had in months. The next day, Ethan called. His voice was casual, the kind people use when they assume everything is fine. "Hey, Mom, Samantha's wondering if you can come early Saturday, maybe around 10. The kids will start arriving then." 10 a.m., perfect timing. I'd be boarding the plane. "I'll see what I can do," I said quietly. "Thanks, Mum. You're the best." When he hung up, I stared at the phone, feeling a strange mix of grief and peace. This was my child, my heart, and yet he had no idea what he'd done, no idea he'd turned his own mother into an errand on a checklist. I walked through the living room, past the photographs of birthdays and graduations. Every frame told the same story: a mother giving, a son receiving. There was no villain, no evil, just a pattern that had gone on too long. I stopped in front of Thomas's picture on the mantel. He was smiling in his old fishing hat, eyes kind as ever. "Can you believe this, Tom?" I whispered. "Your son's about to get married, and I'm his babysitter." If ghosts could speak, I swear he would have said, "Not my Margaret." I pulled out my suitcase, the one I hadn't used since Thomas passed. It smelled faintly of cedar and old air. Filling it felt like breathing for the first time in years. I didn't pack fancy dresses or heels, just light clothes, a bathing suit, sunscreen, and a paperback novel I'd never finished because I was always too busy. I slipped my medications into the side pocket and tucked a small envelope under the elastic strap. Inside the envelope was a letter I'd written that afternoon. Not long, not angry, just honest. Ethan, I love you more than anything. But love doesn't mean obedience. You planned your wedding without me and then assigned me a role I never agreed to play. So, this weekend, I'm giving myself the same gift I gave you your whole life. Freedom. Enjoy your big day. I'll be enjoying mine. Mom. I left the letter on the refrigerator door, right where he used to pin his childhood drawings. It felt poetic, in a way, one last lesson from mother to son. When Saturday morning came, dawn painted the sky in soft coral light. I dressed in a loose linen outfit and stood by the window for a moment. The air smelled like orange blossoms, and somewhere a mockingbird was singing. I didn't feel guilt. I felt calm. My taxi arrived at 6:30. As I closed the door behind me, I glanced back once at the little house that had held all my sacrifices. Then I whispered to it, maybe to myself, "You've done enough. Let them handle the chaos." At the airport, the world buzzed with energy, people rushing, children laughing, announcements echoing. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't responsible for any of it. I bought myself a coffee, sat by the window, and watched the planes take off one by one. When mine appeared at the gate, I took a deep breath and smiled. Ethan would probably call soon. He'd ask where I was. Maybe he'd panic. But by then, I'd already be in the clouds, halfway to my first peaceful weekend in decades. As the plane climbed higher, the world below shrank into patches of green and blue. The clouds looked like whipped cream, endless and soft. I leaned my head back, closed my eyes and thought, I used to pray for Ethan's happiness. Maybe it's time I pray for mine. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a mother first and a woman second. I was just Margaret. And she was finally on her way somewhere that didn't require permission. Saturday morning arrived with a kind of brightness that felt unreal, the kind of light that almost dares you to start over. I woke up before my alarm, heart steady, mind clear. For once, there were no lists running through my head, no recipes, no errands, no reminders of who needed what. I brewed a single cup of coffee and stood by the window as the first rays painted my little garden gold. Usually on mornings like this, I'd be running around, double-checking flower deliveries or ironing tablecloths. Instead, I was watching the sunrise and smiling to myself. At exactly 6:30, the taxi honked outside. I slipped on my sunglasses, grabbed my suitcase and took one last look at my kitchen. The cupcakes from earlier in the week were still sitting under the glass dome, untouched, perfect, pointless. I whispered to them, half joking, "Looks like you'll be the only sweet thing left in that wedding." Then I locked the door behind me. The drive to Miami International took a little over an hour. The city was waking up, joggers on sidewalks, cafes opening, sunlight bouncing off car hoods. I watched it all pass through the window, feeling strangely detached, like I was watching someone else's movie. At the airport, I printed my ticket and checked my bag. The agent smiled. "Vacation, ma'am?" "Long overdue," I replied. I found my gate and sat by the window with my coffee. The world was loud, families shouting, announcements echoing, but inside I felt quiet, a kind of sacred quiet. At 8:15, my phone buzzed. Ethan, Mom, we're here at the venue. Are you on your way?" I didn't answer. A few minutes later, another message. "Ethan, Samantha's asking where to set up the play area. Could you text her?" I turned off notifications and placed the phone face down on the table. My plane began boarding. As I handed my ticket to the attendant, I felt something warm rise in my chest. Not guilt, not fear, but freedom. When the plane took off, the vibration hummed through my seat. Florida disappeared beneath the clouds, and with it, every bit of expectation I'd been chained to for years. 2 hours later, turquoise water stretched endlessly below me. The Bahamas looked like a painting, soft blues melting into gold. When we landed, the air was heavy with salt and sunlight. Helen was waiting for me outside customs, wearing a floppy hat and an expression of pure mischief. "You actually did it," she said, laughing as she hugged me. "You really skipped your son's wedding." "I didn't skip," I corrected her. "I rescheduled." We both burst out laughing. We checked into a small seaside hotel with white shutters and pink hibiscus everywhere. From the balcony, I could see the ocean, shimmering like a secret waiting to be kept. Helen ordered mimosas from room service, and we toasted to our own kind of ceremony. "To mothers who finally retire," she said. "To women who finally remember their names," I added. The first sip burned a little, in the best way. Around noon, my phone started to buzz again. I ignored it through lunch, through our walk along the shore, even through the massage we'd booked. By 3, I counted 16 missed calls, all from Ethan. "Your son's probably losing his mind," Helen said, flipping through a magazine. "He'll survive," I said, turning my phone to silent. She raised an eyebrow. "You're colder than the drink in my hand." I smiled. "I've been warm enough for everyone else my whole life." While Ethan and Samantha were exchanging vows under a string of fairy lights, I was floating in a pool that glowed turquoise under the Bahamian sun. The only music was the sound of palm leaves rustling above me. It was the first time in decades that no one needed me. No one called my name. No one expected anything. I thought about the chaos that must be unfolding back in Florida. I could almost hear the whispers. Where's the groom's mother? Who's watching the kids? Who cancelled the buffet? Maybe they'd be angry. Maybe they'd be embarrassed. But maybe, just maybe, they'd finally understand what it felt like to be taken for granted. By early evening, the sky turned soft pink. Helen and I sat at a beachfront restaurant, our hair windblown, our skin kissed by salt. A waiter brought us grilled fish and white wine. "Do you think he'll forgive you?" Helen asked gently. I laughed softly. "I'm not sure forgiveness is mine to ask for." "What do you mean?" "I didn't wrong him. I just stopped wronging myself." She lifted her glass again. "To that." We clinked glasses, and I swear the sound of the toast was the most peaceful sound I'd heard in years. Halfway through dinner, I finally turned my phone on. It vibrated violently, like a trapped animal. 20 missed calls, 7 voicemails, a flood of text messages. Ethan, "Mom, where are you? The kids are running wild." Ethan, "Please, at least tell me you're okay." Ethan, "Samantha's crying. Everyone's asking where you are." Ethan, "Mom, please, the food didn't arrive either." Ethan, "We can't do this without you." Then one final message, sent just 5 minutes ago. Ethan, "If you see this, please call me. We're desperate." I set the phone down, took a sip of my wine, and exhaled slowly. "Are you going to call him back?" Helen asked. "In a minute." I waited, watching the sun slip below the horizon, orange bleeding into purple, waves whispering secrets no one could hear. Finally, I picked up the phone and dialed. He answered on the first ring. "Mom, where are you? Everyone's freaking out. The kids—" I cut him off gently. "Ethan, slow down. Take a deep breath. Mom, you can't do this. The reception is chaos. We don't even have food. What happened to the caterer?" "I cancelled it," I said calmly. "What?" "I cancelled everything I paid for. The flowers, the food, the cake, all of it." He went silent. I could hear people shouting in the background, a child crying, someone yelling for napkins. "Why would you do that?" he finally said. His voice cracked. "Because, sweetheart, you made me realize something. You didn't invite me to your wedding. You hired me for it, and I don't work for free anymore." "Mom." "Ethan," I said, my voice firm but soft. "You and Samantha wanted a perfect day. You got what you planned for. A day without me." He didn't speak. The silence stretched long enough for the waves to fill it. I love you, son, I continued. But love without respect is just duty, and I'm retired from duty. I could hear him whisper, Mom, like a child again, lost, confused, ashamed. Take care of your wife, Ethan, and next time, hire a babysitter. Then I hung up. Helen let out a long breath. You're ice cold. I smiled faintly, staring out at the ocean. No, Helen, I'm warm again, just in the right places. That night, as the island lights flickered across the water, I lay in bed and felt a strange peace wash over me. For the first time in years, I didn't have to set an alarm, plan a meal, or check on anyone. The world would keep spinning without me managing it. And back home, somewhere between the crying children and the melting cake, my son was learning a lesson I should have taught him long ago. By the time the sun rose over the Bahamas the next morning, I'd already finished breakfast, fresh papaya, coffee, and a piece I hadn't tasted in decades. The air was soft and salty, curling my hair and loosening every knot in my shoulders. I stretched on the balcony, watching small boats drift along the turquoise water. Somewhere, a steel drum played a slow island tune. And then, my phone began to buzz again. At first, I ignored it. But curiosity is a powerful thing. When I finally picked it up, I saw a string of desperate messages from Ethan. 8:42 a.m. Mom, please call me. 8:47 a.m. Did you really cancel the caterer? The venue says they have no food coming. 9:02 a.m. We can't reach anyone. The florist said you stopped payment. 9:16 a.m. Mom, people are starting to arrive. Samantha's crying. I sipped my coffee. The ocean glittered like glass. They were learning, not through punishment, but through absence. 9:27 a.m. Mom, we need you, please. 9:45 a.m. The kids are showing up with their parents. They keep asking where the babysitter is. 10:10 a.m. Mom, please, just come for a few hours. We'll pay you. That last message made me laugh out loud. Helen looked up from her magazine. What's so funny? They just offered me money to do the job they never asked me if I wanted. She grinned. How much? I glanced at the text. $500. Helen nearly spat out her drink. 500? For 10 kids and a ruined buffet? That's cheap. We both laughed until tears rolled down our cheeks. At 11 o'clock, my phone rang again. I decided to answer this time. Mom, thank God. Ethan's voice was frantic. The background noise pure chaos, clinking glasses, children shrieking, people shouting. You have to come. The kids are everywhere. One just ran into the cake table. Oh dear, I said, feigning concern. Was it a nice cake? Mom, this isn't funny. I'm not laughing, sweetheart. I'm simply observing natural consequences. Please, just come for an hour. We'll figure out the rest later. I could hear Samantha sobbing behind him. Then her voice, sharp, hysterical, came through the line. Charlotte. She always called me Charlotte when she was angry, never Mom. You can't do this. You promised the food. You said you'd help. I did, I replied calmly. I promised when I thought I was a guest, not the staff. This is your son's wedding, she screamed. Yes, I said, and my son decided his mother should work it, so now he's learning to manage without her. In the background, I heard a crash, a child crying, and someone yelling, Where's the babysitter? I took a slow sip of my drink. You sound busy, dear. Maybe you should handle that. Please, she sobbed. There are 15 kids here. They're throwing petals into the fountain. Oh, how festive. Charlotte. Samantha, I said softly, you should know something about me. I've spent 40 years fixing other people's messes. Today, I'm letting you fix yours. Then I hung up. By noon, my phone was filled with voicemails, each one a different flavor of panic. Message 1. Mom, the guests are asking for food. What do we do? Message 2. Samantha's sister says you ruined everything. Please call. Message 3. Mom, one of the kids fell asleep under the table and we can't wake him up. Message 4. Mom, please, I'm sorry. That last one, the softest, made me pause. I replayed it 3 times. His voice had lost the authority of a grown man. It was the voice of my little boy again, the one who used to hold my hand when he was scared. For a brief moment, I felt the sting of guilt. Then I looked out at the ocean, at the endless expanse of freedom, and remembered why I left. This wasn't about revenge, it was about respect. Sometimes love means letting someone stumble hard enough to remember the ground they walk on. Around 3 p.m, Helen and I were lying under beach umbrellas, half asleep, when my phone rang again. This time, it was an unfamiliar number. "Hello? Miss Hayes?" The voice was male, older, polite. "This is Michael, Samantha's father." I straightened slightly. "Oh, hello, Michael. I just wanted to say I understand why you're not here. What they did was wrong. My daughter's been crying for hours, and frankly, I think she needed this." That surprised me. "You do?" "Yes, she's been spoiled since she was a child. Maybe now she'll realize weddings aren't built on free labor and guilt." He sighed. "You raised a good man, Miss Hayes. He just married a complicated woman." "I suppose we all have to learn somehow," I said quietly. When we hung up, Helen gave me a knowing look. "An ally?" she asked. "Maybe, or maybe just another tired parent who's been through the same thing." That evening, while the sun dipped low and the air turned gold, I finally called Ethan back. He answered instantly. "Mom?" His voice was hoarse. "It's over. The whole wedding's ruined." "I'm sorry to hear that, sweetheart." The food never came, half the guests left early, the photographer quit halfway through, the kids destroyed the floral arch. "Sounds memorable," I said. "Mom," he whispered, "why did you do this?" I took a deep breath. "I didn't do anything, Ethan. I just stopped doing everything." He didn't respond. The silence on the line was thick. "Mom," he said finally, "I know you're angry, but this was too much." "Too much?" I repeated. "Do you know what's too much, Ethan? Working myself to exhaustion for people who think my love is a resource. Being treated like free labor because it's easier than saying thank you. Watching my son let his wife talk about me like I'm the help." He exhaled sharply. "You heard that?" "Yes, every word." "Oh, Mom." I could hear the shame in his voice. For a moment I wanted to ease it, to say it was okay, but it wasn't. "Ethan," I said, "you're not a bad person. You're just used to me saying yes. That ends now." He didn't argue. Maybe he couldn't. Finally, he said, "Samantha's in bed crying. She says you hate her." "I don't hate her," I replied softly. "I just won't let her use me. There's a difference." He was quiet again. Then, barely a whisper, "What do I tell everyone?" "Tell them the truth, that your mother retired from being the unpaid help." Before he could answer, I said, "I love you, Ethan, truly. But until you learn that respect and love are the same thing, I'm staying right where I am." Then I hung up. That night, I sat on the balcony as the wind brushed through the palms. Down below, the ocean whispered against the shore, a soft applause for a performance finally ended. Helen came out with 2 glasses of wine. "To the chaos," she said, handing me one. "To the lesson," I corrected. We clinked glasses under the starlight. Somewhere back in Florida, plates were broken, guests were angry, and Samantha was crying into her designer veil. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't cleaning up the mess. For the first time in my life, I wasn't in the mess. And that, I thought as I watched the moon rise over the ocean, was the most beautiful consequence I could have ever asked for. The morning after the wedding, the island was drenched in gold. The air was still, heavy with the scent of salt and hibiscus. I woke up earlier than usual, not from an alarm, not from duty, just from the habit of someone who's spent a lifetime waking for others. Only this time, there was no one to cook for, no one to call, no one to fix. The first thing I noticed was silence. Not the awkward silence of resentment, but the deep, full kind. It was the sound of peace taking its first breath. Helen was still asleep, one arm hanging over the bed, her sun hat crooked on the chair. I smiled, slipped on my robe, and stepped out onto the balcony. The sea stretched endlessly ahead, calm, endless, and indifferent. Waves whispered softly against the rocks, like they were telling secrets only free women could understand. For the first time in years, my chest didn't feel tight. I didn't need to explain myself, justify myself, or apologize for existing. There was just me, the morning, and the world I'd been too busy to notice. After breakfast, Helen joined me by the shore, holding 2 cups of coffee. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You seem lighter." "I am," I said simply. "You don't feel guilty?" I took a deep breath, letting the ocean breeze fill my lungs. I used to think guilt meant I was a good person, that it proved I cared, but I think it just means I've been trained to feel bad for saying no. Helen nodded slowly. That's a hard habit to break. Hard, but not impossible. We walked along the wet sand in silence, the water curling around our ankles. Every step felt like washing away years of quiet resentment. Every wave whispered you did the right thing. Somewhere in the distance, a child was laughing. Not one of mine, not one I had to watch. Just a sound of joy, carried by the wind, free of obligation. I smiled. "You know what's strange, Helen? I don't miss them today." She gave me a knowing look. "That's not strange. That's healing." Later that afternoon, we sat by the pool, reading in comfortable silence. My phone lay next to me, face down. It hadn't buzzed once all morning. No apologies, no guilt, no drama, just quiet. Around noon, a message appeared, one single notification on the black screen. "Ethan, we made it through, everyone's gone. I'll call tomorrow. No anger, no blame, just tired honesty." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I set the phone back down and turned another page in my book. It could wait. That evening, we went for dinner at a small seaside restaurant. The owner, an older woman with silver hair and dark eyes, served us grilled lobster and mango salad. When she poured the wine, she said softly, "You two look like women who finally said enough." Helen laughed. "That obvious, huh?" The woman smiled. "Peace has a face, and you both have it." I couldn't help but smile back. As we ate, I realized how different food tastes when it isn't seasoned with exhaustion. Every bite felt earned. Every laugh felt deserved. Helen raised her glass. To silence, I lifted mine. To not needing to explain it. We clinked glasses, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. There was nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove. When I returned to the hotel room that night, I opened the balcony door again. The sea was darker now, rippling silver under the moonlight. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the soft wind brush through my hair. My phone buzzed once, a voicemail from Ethan. I didn't play it. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally trusted that caring didn't mean immediate response. I whispered to the quiet room, "He'll learn. They both will." The air felt warm, forgiving, the kind of warmth that didn't ask anything of me. I thought of Thomas again, my late husband, and wondered what he would have said about all this. Probably something simple like, "About time you took a damn vacation." I laughed softly at the thought. Then I closed my eyes, listening to the ocean breathe in and out. Somewhere beyond the horizon, my son was probably staring at the wreckage of his perfect wedding, and maybe, just maybe, understanding what respect really costs. But that wasn't my concern anymore. I'd already paid my share. That night, I fell asleep without dreams, without guilt, without the weight of anyone else's happiness resting on my shoulders. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt earned. It felt holy. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need to be anyone's mother to feel whole. 2 days later, I was back home. The Florida air felt heavier than the ocean breeze, but the silence had followed me. like a loyal shadow that refused to leave. When I unlocked my front door, everything was exactly as I'd left it. The smell of vanilla from the old cupcakes had turned faint, almost ghostly. The note on the fridge was still there, my handwriting steady and unapologetic. I love you, but I will not be part of anything that disrespects me. I touched the paper with my fingertips and smiled faintly. There was no regret in that note, only truth. I made tea and sat in my favourite armchair, the one by the window that caught the afternoon sun. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing anywhere. I wasn't waiting for anyone. And that's when I opened my phone. 33 missed calls, 15 voicemails, dozens of messages from family members, some angry, some confused, some quietly supportive. But Ethan's name was the one that drew my eyes every time. I pressed play on the first voicemail. "Mom, please call me. We need to talk." Then another. "I know you are hurt. I get it now. I really do. Please, just call." And then the last one, quieter. "Mom, I think I understand why you left. I'm sorry it took a disaster for me to see it." His voice cracked on that last word. Something in me softened, not enough to erase what happened, but enough to remember that he was still my boy. I set the phone down and let out a long breath. I walked to my bookshelf and pulled down an old leather journal I hadn't opened in years. It was filled with my handwriting, lesson plans from when I was a teacher, grocery lists, and small reflections from quieter nights. But tucked near the back was a page I'd written after Thomas died. It said, "One day, I hope Ethan grows up kind, not just successful. I hope he knows that love without respect breaks the giver first." I ran my finger under the faded words. 15 years ago, I had written that as a wish. Now, it felt like a warning I had forgotten to deliver, until now. That afternoon, as the sky turned orange outside, I took a long walk through the neighbourhood. Kids were playing with water guns, dogs barked in the distance, and a woman was trimming roses in her yard. Ordinary life, the kind that goes on no matter who cries at a wedding. I passed the church where Ethan had been baptised, the same church that was supposed to host his reception. The sign outside read, "Sometimes silence speaks the loudest." I stopped in my tracks. I smiled. The world has a funny way of confirming your choices when you need it most. When I returned home, I sat on the porch with my tea and let the wind play with my hair. In the quiet hum of the evening, I thought about all the versions of me that had existed through the years. The young wife who said yes to everything to keep the peace. The single mother who worked herself to exhaustion to make sure her son never lacked anything. The older woman who kept giving long after anyone was asking politely. And now, the woman who had finally said no, and meant it. It wasn't pride I felt, it was peace. Pride fades. Peace lingers. The next morning, Ethan's car pulled into my driveway. I watched from the window for a moment before stepping outside. He looked tired, eyes red, shoulders slumped. He was holding a small bouquet of lilies, my favourite. "Hi, Mum," he said softly. "Hi, Ethan." We stood there for a few seconds, just looking at each other. Then he said, "You look happy." "I am," I replied, for the first time in a long while. He nodded, shame flickering across his face. "I came to say I'm sorry," he said. "Not because the wedding fell apart, though it did, but because I didn't see what I'd done to you." I waited quietly. Sometimes silence is the only way to make someone keep talking. "When Samantha and I were cleaning up after everyone left," he continued, "I kept thinking about all the times you helped me, without me even asking, and I realised I stopped asking a long time ago. I just expected." "That's what happens when love doesn't have boundaries," I said gently. He nodded, eyes glistening. "You didn't deserve that. You deserved to sit in the front row, not in the back chasing kids." I smiled sadly. "At least you understand now." He handed me the flowers. "We'll make it right, Mom. I promise." Don't promise, I said softly. Just remember. He nodded again, then hesitated. Samantha wants to apologize too, but I told her she should wait until you're ready. I will be, I said, but not yet. He hugged me, not the quick, distracted kind, but the kind that says I get it now. And for the first time since that awful conversation in my kitchen, I hugged him back without anger sitting between us. When he left, I went back inside and sat by the window again. The sunlight poured in, warm, forgiving. That evening, I wrote in my journal, "We teach people how to treat us. When we stay silent, they mistake it for agreement. When we give endlessly, they call it love. But real love needs respect the way flowers need water. Without it, everything wilts." I closed the notebook and looked around my quiet little home. Every chair, every cup, every photograph, all reminders of the life I had built for others. But now, for the first time, it finally felt like it belonged to me too. I poured myself another cup of tea, leaned back and whispered, "I didn't lose a son. I gained myself." And somehow, that didn't feel like a tragedy at all. 3 days after Ethan's visit, the doorbell rang again. I already knew who it was before I opened the door. Samantha stood there, holding a small bouquet of white tulips and a paper bag that looked suspiciously homemade. Her eyes were swollen, her face bare of makeup, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked like a real person, not a performance. "Hi, Mrs. Hayes," she said quietly. "Hello, Samantha. May I come in?" I stepped aside and gestured toward the living room. "Of course." She sat on the edge of the sofa like a guest who wasn't sure she was welcome, which, to be fair, she wasn't sure of anything yet. I poured her a glass of water and waited. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "I owe you the biggest apology of my life." I said nothing. I wanted her to fill the silence herself. "I was cruel," she continued, "and selfish. When Ethan told me you'd offered to help, I saw it as a chance to save money, not as an act of love. I told myself it was just a favor, but I never asked if it was something you wanted to do." Her hands were shaking slightly. "When you didn't show up, I thought you were punishing us. But then, when everything went wrong, I realized you weren't punishing us at all. You were teaching us something we refused to learn." She looked up, eyes glistening. "I'm ashamed of how I treated you. I made fun of you behind your back. I acted like you were a servant. You didn't deserve that." I stayed quiet for a long moment. The only sound was the faint ticking of the wall clock. Finally, I said, "You're right. I didn't deserve it." She flinched, but didn't look away. That was a good sign. "I'm not going to pretend your words didn't hurt me," I continued. "They did, because for 2 years I thought of you as the daughter I never had. And hearing you talk about me that way, as if I were an inconvenience, it broke something inside me." "I know," she whispered. "And I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I just wanted to tell you that I see it now. I see everything you did for us and how badly we repaid it." She slid the paper bag across the coffee table toward me. "I made these myself, lemon bars. Ethan said they were your favorite." I glanced down at the slightly uneven squares, the sugar dusted too thick in some places. They weren't perfect, but they were honest. "Thank you," I said softly. Samantha exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath for days. "I don't want to go back to pretending everything's fine," she said. "I just want a chance to start over, to earn your respect, and maybe, one day, your love again." I looked at her carefully. She wasn't trying to charm me this time. There was no fake smile, no perfect tone, just sincerity and regret. "Samantha," I said slowly, "do you understand why I left?" She nodded. "Because we treated you like you didn't have a choice." "Exactly. Because you saw my love as a service. But love isn't free labor. It's a gift. And when a gift is taken for granted, it disappears." She wiped her eyes with a tissue. "I know that now." "I hope you do," I said. "Because the next time you have a big event and someone offers to help, you'll look them in the eye and ask if they truly want to, And if they say no, you'll thank them anyway. She nodded through tears. I will. For a long while, we just sat there, the tension slowly melting. Then I leaned forward slightly. You asked for a chance to start over. I'll give it to you. But there are rules. Anything, she said quickly. Rule number 1, I said. You will never assume my help. You'll ask. And if I say no, you'll respect it. Yes, ma'am. Rule number 2, if you ever speak badly about me to someone again, even as a joke, I'll know you haven't changed. She nodded. That's fair. Rule number 3, I said with a small smile. If you really want to make it up to me, you'll treat your own mother, or anyone older than you, with the respect you forgot to give me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I promise I will. I reached over and handed her a napkin. And one last thing. Don't promise. Just show me. She laughed through her tears. Okay, I'll show you. When Ethan arrived an hour later, the three of us sat together for the first time since the disaster. It wasn't comfortable, but it was real. He put his arm around Samantha's shoulder. I told you she'd listen if you were honest. I smiled faintly. Listening isn't the same as forgetting. I know, he said quietly, but it's a start. We talked for a while about the wedding, about the guests, about how half the kids had turned the dance floor into a playground. At one point, Ethan said, funny thing is, everyone ended up remembering that day anyway, just not for the reasons we planned. Sometimes, I said, the lesson is the memory. He chuckled softly. You're right about that. Before they left, Samantha turned back at the door. Mrs. Hayes? Yes? I've booked us 3 seats for next Sunday's brunch. You, me, and Ethan. No kids, no chores, no expectations. Just family. I hesitated for a moment, then smiled. That sounds lovely. When the door closed behind them, I stood there for a while, staring at the tulips she'd left on the table. Their petals were trembling slightly in the air conditioner's breeze, fragile but alive. It struck me then, forgiveness wasn't a switch you flipped. It was a slow blooming, delicate, uneven, but worth waiting for. I leaned back in my chair and whispered, maybe we'll be okay. Not perfect, but okay. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The following Sunday was bright and blue, the kind of morning that almost dares you to forgive. I wore a pale yellow dress I hadn't taken out of the closet in years. It used to be my special occasion dress. I guess today counted as one. Ethan's car pulled up exactly at 10. Samantha got out first, smiling nervously, holding a box wrapped in floral paper. Ethan followed with that same hesitant look sons get when they're not sure if their mothers are still angry. Morning, Mum, he said. Morning, I answered. Ready for brunch? Samantha asked, her tone careful, respectful. I nodded. Let's see how well you two behave in public, I teased. They both laughed, a little awkwardly at first, but the tension broke like ice under sunlight. We went to a small cafe by the lake, the kind with wildflowers in mason jars and sunlight streaming through the windows. The hostess seated us at a corner table with a view of the water. For a while we just talked, small things first, neutral ground, the weather, work, the ducks floating by the pier. But under the surface, something deeper was happening, a quiet understanding forming where resentment used to live. Samantha reached for her glass of orange juice and said softly, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about love and respect. I didn't grow up seeing much of either, but I want to learn. I looked at her for a moment, searching her face. This time there was no pretense, just sincerity. You already started, I said. Learning begins when you admit you didn't know. She smiled, tears glimmering. That's probably the kindest thing anyone's ever said to me. The waiter brought our food, pancakes, fruit, and a small plate of lemon bars. Samantha blushed. I made those. Thought we'd try them together this time. Ethan grinned. They're better than the ones from last week. Less sugar on top. I took a bite. The crust was uneven, the filling a little tart. But they tasted like humility, and that's a flavor you don't find often. "They're perfect," I said. The relief that washed over her face was almost childlike. After brunch, we walked along the lake. Ethan slipped his hands into his pockets. "Mom," he said, "I keep thinking about that letter you left. You said love without respect is just duty. I can't stop replaying that line." "Maybe because it was meant for you," I said gently. "I know." And it hit hard. I always thought I was showing love by taking care of things, paying bills, organizing, fixing. But you were right. Love isn't control, it's listening. I smiled. "You're growing up, son. Took you 42 years, but still." He laughed softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess I had to fail a wedding to get there." "Sometimes we learn best from the lessons that cost us the most." He nodded, and I needed that cost. Samantha walked a few steps ahead, skipping pebbles into the water. Then she turned and said, "You know, I've been trying to undo some of my mistakes. I called the florist you cancelled, I paid the bill myself and sent them an apology note." "That's very mature of you," I said, but I also wrote to every parent who brought kids to the wedding, told them the truth, not excuses, that we'd used someone's kindness and lost sight of gratitude. I was impressed. "That takes courage," she nodded slowly. "I didn't do it for forgiveness. I just needed to tell the truth out loud. It felt lighter." I smiled. "That's what truth does. It doesn't erase what happened, but it lets you breathe again." As the sun climbed higher, we sat on a bench overlooking the lake. Ethan leaned back, watching the ripples in the water. "You know, Mom," he said, "we've decided to host another small dinner next month. Not to replace the wedding, but to thank the people who stayed despite everything. We'd love for you to come, as our guest of honor this time." I tilted my head. "Guest of honor?" He grinned. "Front row seat, no kids, no chores. Just you." I laughed softly. "You sure about that? No sudden babysitting surprises?" He groaned. "Never again." Samantha added, "I even booked a catering service, and I already tipped them in advance." "Now that," I said, "is progress." That evening, back home, I placed the tulips they'd brought last week into a new vase and set them on the dining table. The petals were still bright, opening wider each day, fragile things, but determined. I sat with a cup of tea and replayed the day in my mind, the laughter, the small pauses, the gentle apologies that didn't sound rehearsed. It wasn't a perfect reunion, but it was real. And that's all I'd ever wanted, real love, not polished politeness. Later that week, Samantha texted me a photo, her and Ethan holding hands in their backyard, the caption reading, "Starting again, this time with gratitude." Below it, she'd added a small note, "Thank you for teaching us that respect is the heartbeat of family." I stared at the message for a long moment, tears prickling behind my eyes. Then I typed back, "You're welcome, and thank you for listening." A few days later, I hosted them for dinner at my house. For the first time in years, I cooked because I wanted to, not because someone expected it. I made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and, yes, lemon bars. When they arrived, I noticed something different. They didn't bring stress or noise. They brought calm. Samantha hugged me tightly. "This feels like home again," she said. "It always was," I replied. "We just had to dust off the parts we forgot." After they left, I cleaned up slowly, humming to myself. The house smelled of rosemary and warmth. As I wiped the counter, I realized that forgiveness doesn't always need grand gestures or emotional speeches. Sometimes it's as simple as sharing a meal without resentment sitting at the table. I stood by the window, watching the moon rise. In its silver light, I whispered, "Maybe love didn't fail us. Maybe we just had to learn how to use it right." The wind rustled the curtains, soft as a reply. And for the first time in a long, long time, I went to bed smiling. Not because everything was perfect, but because I finally knew I didn't need it to be. A year later, My life looked completely different. Not louder, not bigger, just freer. I had stopped trying to fill every silence with service, stopped confusing love with sacrifice, stopped apologizing for wanting peace, and somehow the world didn't fall apart. It just got quieter and kinder. After everything that happened, I started writing. At first, it was just for myself, notes, reflections, letters I'd never send. But then a friend read one of my pieces and said, "You should share this. Other women need to hear it." So I did, slowly, hesitantly, then boldly. 6 months later, my little notebook had turned into a manuscript, a collection of essays and recipes I'd carried through my life. I called it Cooking with Boundaries. It wasn't just about food, it was about serving love with dignity, about knowing when to feed others and when to feed your own soul. When the book was published, Ethan organised the launch. He rented a small hall, decorated it with sunflowers and framed photos of our family through the years. Samantha helped plan everything, and this time, she paid for it herself. Before the event started, Ethan took my hand and said, "Mom, this time you're not the help, you're the reason." Those words, simple as they were, filled something in me that had been empty for decades. The guests arrived, neighbours, old students, even a few parents from the preschool where I used to teach. When I stood at the podium, the lights felt warm on my face, not blinding like before. I looked out into the crowd and saw Ethan and Samantha sitting in the front row, smiling with pride, not expectation. I began, "This book isn't about cooking, it's about nourishment, for the heart, not just the stomach. It's about learning the difference between giving and being used, between kindness and compliance, between love and the fear of losing it." The audience was silent, the kind of silence that listens. For years, I continued, I thought being a good mother meant saying yes to everything, but saying yes without joy turns love into labour. And the day I said no, I found my yes again, yes to myself, yes to respect, yes to peace. I could see Samantha wiping her eyes in the front row. Ethan reached over and held her hand. It was the most beautiful sight, my son learning what partnership truly means. After the event, Samantha came up to me, holding a copy of my book. She'd written something on the first page. "Thank you for showing me that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors to real love." I smiled and hugged her. "You learnt faster than I did," I said. Life became softer after that. I started teaching small community workshops for women, not about cooking, but about reclaiming dignity. We met every Thursday afternoon in the library basement. The class wasn't fancy, a circle of chairs, cups of tea, laughter, tears. One week, a woman in her 70s raised her hand and said, "My daughter thinks I'm selfish for saying no to babysitting every weekend." The room went quiet. I smiled gently and told her, "Then you're doing it right, because saying no isn't selfish, it's sacred. It tells the world you still belong to yourself." She started to cry, then she laughed, then everyone did. It felt like coming full circle. One morning, while cleaning up after class, I received a text from Ethan. It was a photo, a small crib, freshly assembled. Beneath it, his message read, "We're expecting, and we promise you'll be grandma, not the babysitter." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. When the baby was born, a little girl with Samantha's eyes and Ethan's dimples, they named her Lila Margaret Hayes. Holding her in my arms for the first time, I felt something shift again. Not the old ache of responsibility, but the soft, easy love that comes when you finally understand your worth. Ethan whispered, "Mom, you're the reason we'll raise her differently." And in that moment, I realised every painful choice had led me here, to this small miracle, sleeping in my arms. That night, back home, I sat on my porch, watching the fireflies blink against the dark. The world was humming softly, like a song only I could hear. I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. There's a strange peace that comes when you stop trying to earn love. It's lighter, purer, honest. It asks for nothing, and in return, gives you everything that's real. I looked up at the sky, whispering into the warm air. Thank you, life, for teaching me that dignity and love can live in the same heart. Then I laughed quietly and added, and thank you for the chaos. It made the peace taste better. As I turned off the porch light, I caught my reflection in the window. Older, softer, but undeniably alive. For the first time, I didn't see a servant or a savior. I saw a woman who had finally become her own home. And if you ask me what I learnt after it all, I'd tell you this. Sometimes saying no is how we say yes. Yes to peace, yes to respect, yes to ourselves. The waves of life never stop coming. But when you learn to stand tall, not to please but to live, the tide doesn't drown you anymore. It carries you home.